If you served in Vietnam, you know that death didn't always announce itself with gunfire or explosions. Sometimes it came silently hidden beneath leaves, buried in the mud, waiting. You could walk the same trail 100 times and feel safe. On the 101st, the ground would give way beneath you, and everything would change in an instant. I've spent years researching the Vietnam War, not just the battles or the body counts, but the psychological experience of the men who fought there, and one thing becomes devastatingly clear. The traps used by the Viet Cong weren't just weapons, they were instruments of psychological warfare designed to break the human spirit before they ever touched the body. That this wasn't a conventional war. There were no clear front lines, no safe zones. Every step could be your last, and the enemy knew it. In World War II, soldiers knew where the enemy was. They could see the battlefield. They understood the rules of engagement. But Vietnam rewrote those rules entirely. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army forces fought a guerrilla war that turned the jungle itself into a weapon. They used the terrain, the vegetation, the very ground beneath American boots as part of their arsenal, and their traps were devastatingly effective. According to military records, approximately 11% of all American casualties in Vietnam were caused by booby traps and mines. That's over 7,000 soldiers killed, and tens of thousands more wounded, not by bullets, not by artillery, but by hidden devices that cost almost nothing to make. But the numbers don't tell the full story. The psychological impact was exponential, because when every step could trigger a trap, when every vine could be a tripwire, when every mound of dirt could hide death, soldiers stopped trusting the world around them. They developed what we now recognize as a state of constant, exhausting alertness that many never fully escaped. Even decades after coming home. Today, we're going to examine 5 of the most terrifying traps that American soldiers faced in Vietnam. We'll look at how they worked, why they were so effective, and most importantly, how they affected the men who encountered them, both in the moment and for the rest of their lives. This isn't about glorifying violence. It's about understanding what these soldiers went through, and honoring that experience with honest examination. Let's begin. The Punji Stake Pit is probably the most infamous trap of the Vietnam War, and for good reason. In its simplest form, it was a hole usually 3 to 4 feet deep, covered with leaves, branches, and jungle debris to blend perfectly with the surrounding terrain. At the bottom, sharpened bamboo stakes, sometimes dozens of them, pointing upward at angles designed to pierce through a soldier's leg, foot, or entire body if the pit was deep enough. But the Viet Cong didn't stop there. They understood infection. They understood that a wounded soldier requires more resources than a dead one. Medical evacuation, surgery, recovery time, psychological trauma to the unit. So they would coat the stakes in human feces, animal waste, rotting vegetation, anything that would introduce bacteria into the wound. You'd be walking point leading your squad through dense jungle. The man behind you is maybe 5 feet back. You're scanning for movement, listening for sounds, trying to watch for then your foot lands on what feels like solid ground, but it's not. The camouflage gives way. There's a fraction of a second where you realize what's happening, and then you're falling. The stakes don't just puncture. At the angles they're set, they tear. If you fall straight down, they can pierce through your boot, through your foot, sometimes through your ankle or calf. If the pit is deeper and you fall at an angle, the stakes can penetrate your torso. One Marine veteran, interviewed in the 1980s, described it like this: you hear this cracked bamboo breaking through your boot leather, and then the pain hits you all at once. But worse than the pain is knowing what's on those stakes. You know you're not just hurt, you're infected. And out there, infection could kill you just as dead as a bullet. The Punji Pit didn't just wound body, it wounded trust. After soldiers encountered these traps, every step became a calculation. Veterans report that they would stare at the ground for hours, analyzing every leaf pattern, every shadow, every slight depression in the earth. They stopped walking naturally. Some developed a shuffling gait, testing the ground with each step. Michael Hare, in his book Dispatches, wrote about soldiers who would freeze mid-step, unable to put their foot down, paralyzed by the possibility of what might be beneath them. The hypervigilance became permanent for many. Decades after the war, veterans report difficulty walking in parks, forests, or even their own backyards without scanning the ground. The fear doesn't fade, it just becomes part of who you are. Medical records indicate that Punji stake wounds had infection rates exceeding 80% in the field. Even with antibiotics and evacuation to field hospitals, many soldiers suffered amputations, chronic infections, or complications that lasted years. Some wounds never fully healed. The bamboo whip was elegance in lethality. The Viet Cong would bend a young bamboo tree flexible but strong and secure it under tension with a release mechanism connected to a tripwire. Attached to the bamboo were stakes, nails, or sharpened metal fragments. When a soldier tripped the wire, the bamboo would snap forward with tremendous force, striking the victim at chest or head height. Some versions were positioned to swing horizontally across a trail. Others were angled to strike downward. The most sophisticated variants had multiple bamboo whips triggered by the same wire, creating a zone where escape was nearly impossible. The tripwire was almost invisible, a thin vine, a piece of fishing line, sometimes just a strand of bamboo fiber stretched across the trail at ankle height. You wouldn't see it. You'd feel it when your boot made contact, a slight resistance, barely noticeable, and then you'd hear it, that sound whoosh the bamboo released. Veterans describe it as one of the most terrifying sounds of the war, because once you heard it, it was already too late. The bamboo traveled faster than you could react. If it struck your chest, the stakes could penetrate your ribcage, puncture your lungs, pierce your heart. If it struck your face, soldiers were blinded, disfigured, or killed instantly. One veteran described seeing a man hit by a whip trap. He turned toward the sound, and the bamboo caught him across the throat. The stakes went through. He was dead before he hit the ground, and we couldn't do anything but stand there and stare. The whip trap created a specific kind of fear, the fear of the invisible trigger. Soldiers became obsessed with tripwires. They would move at a crawl, sometimes taking hours to cover a few hundred meters. They developed rituals, stepping over roots instead of on them, avoiding anything that looked like it had been placed rather than fallen naturally. But the worst part was the sound. That whoosh haunted veterans. Years later, the sound of wind through trees, the creak of bamboo, even the snap of a breaking stick could trigger flashbacks. Some veterans refused to go camping, refused to enter wooded areas, because the sounds were too similar. Exact casualty figures for whip traps are difficult to isolate, as many were classified under booby trap casualties. However, field reports from the 1st Infantry Division and 25th Infantry Division document dozens of whip trap encounters, with fatality rates estimated at 40 to 50% for direct strikes to the head or chest. The cartridge trap was brutally simple: a live rifle or artillery round, rigged to a firing mechanism and hidden in a location where a soldier might trigger it under a crate, in a doorway, beneath a body, inside a supply box. The Viet Cong used American ammunition for these traps whenever possible, which added a layer of psychological cruelty. American soldiers were being killed by their own bullets. Some versions used a nail, fixed in place with the primer end of a cartridge positioned against it. When pressure was applied, the cartridge would fire. Others used tripwires connected to improvised firing pins. Imagine you're clearing a village. Your unit enters a Hocha, a small dwelling that appears abandoned. You're checking for weapons, supplies, intelligence. You see a wooden crate in the corner. It looks like it might contain something valuable. You reach down to lift the lid. The moment you do, the trap fires. The bullet, or in some cases, shotgun round or grenade, explodes directly into your body at point-blank range. There's no distance, no chance to react, no protective cover. The damage is catastrophic. A veteran from the 101st Airborne described it this way: "We lost a guy to a cartridge trap in a Momasan's hut. He moved a rice bag, and it went off. Took his hand clean off at the wrist. The round went through his palm first, then detonated. We found pieces of the cartridge casing embedded in the ceiling beams." The cartridge trap made even the simplest actions terrifying. Soldiers stopped trusting objects. They wouldn't move debris without checking it first. They wouldn't sit down without examining the ground. They wouldn't open doors without standing to the side. This paranoia was adaptive in the field. It saved lives. But it didn't turn off when soldiers came home. Veterans report years of compulsive checking behaviors, inspecting chairs before sitting, searching under car hoods before starting engines, refusing to accept packages without examining them first. One veteran told an interviewer in 1992, "I still can't take anything at face value. If something looks easy, I assume it's a trap. My wife used to ask me why I'd inspect everything she handed me. I didn't know how to explain that in Vietnam. The innocent-looking things were the ones that killed you." Cartridge traps accounted for an estimated 3 to 5% of booby trap casualties, but their psychological impact was disproportionate to their numbers. Units that experienced cartridge trap casualties showed marked increases in time spent on clearing operations and significant stress indicators in after-action reports. The mace trap was medieval in its brutality. The Viet Cong would construct a heavy weights, sometimes a clay pot filled with metal fragments, sometimes a wooden ball studded with nails or bamboo stakes, and, suspended from a tree branch, the weight would be pulled back and secured under tension, connected to a tripwire across a trail. When triggered, the weight would swing down and forward like a pendulum, striking the victim with crushing force. The spikes or nails would penetrate flesh, while the weight itself could break bones, fracture skulls, or cause massive internal trauma. You're moving through jungle so dense you can barely see 10 feet ahead. Your squad is in single file, weapons ready, every sense on alert. Your boot catches on something, a vine, you think, or a root. You feel it give slightly, then you hear it, a creak of rope, the rush of something moving through air. You look up just in time to see the weight swinging toward you. There's no time to dodge, no time to drop. It hits you with the force of a car accident. One soldier, quoted in a military medical journal, described watching a mace trap strike his platoon sergeant. It caught him in the side of the head. The sound was like dropping a watermelon. He went down instantly. We thought he was dead, but he was still breathing, barely. His skull was fractured. His jaw was broken in 3 places, and he had spikes embedded in his neck and shoulder. He survived, but he was never the same. Brain damage. He couldn't speak right after that. The mace trap added a vertical dimension to the fear. Soldiers couldn't just watch the ground, they had to watch above them too. The jungle canopy became another source of threat. Veterans described the exhaustion of trying to maintain 360-degree awareness. Forward, backward, down, up. It was impossible to sustain. But the alternative was death. Many developed neck and back problems from constantly looking up and down. The sound of the trap, that creak and whoosh, became another trigger. Veterans report adverse reactions to the sound of swings in playgrounds, 2 chains being pulled, to any sound that resembles rope under tension releasing. Mace traps were less common than other booby traps, but when they struck, they were devastating. Field reports indicate fatality rates of 30 to 40% and serious injury rates exceeding 80%. The head and torso strikes frequently caused permanent disability. The grenade trap used actual military grenades, sometimes American M26 fragmentation grenades, sometimes Chinese or Soviet grenades, rigged to tripwires or pressure plates. The Viet Cong had access to thousands of these grenades, often captured from American forces or supplied by allies. The basic mechanism was simple. Remove the safety pin, hold the spoon in place with a wire or string, and rig it so that the wire releases when a soldier trips it or applies pressure. Once released, the spoon flies off, the fuse ignites, and you have 3 to 5 seconds before detonation. Some versions were placed in trees and rigged to fall when triggered. Others were buried with only the tripwire visible. The most sophisticated versions used multiple grenades in a cluster, maximizing the kill radius. The thing about grenades is that their fragmentation pattern is indiscriminate. The metal casing shatters into hundreds of jagged pieces, traveling at high velocity in all directions. The kill radius of an M26 grenade is 5 meters, with a casualty radius extending to 15 meters. When a grenade trap was triggered, everyone nearby was in danger. One veteran described it. Our point man hit a wire, and we heard the spoon pop. That sound, metallic, sharp, we all knew what it meant. We had maybe 3 seconds. Some guys dove for cover, some froze. When it went off, 3 men went down. One died before the medevac arrived. The other 2 lost limbs, and we hadn't even seen the enemy. The delayed fuse was psychologically devastating. You'd trigger it, hear the spoon, and then have a few seconds to realize what was about to happen. Some soldiers tried to run, some threw themselves on the ground, some just stood there, paralyzed by fear. The grenade trap created anticipatory terror. That 3 to 5 second delay between triggering the trap and detonation was enough time for your brain to fully process your imminent death or maiming. Veterans described those seconds as feeling like minutes, time dilated. Some reported vivid thoughts of family, home, regrets. Others described a strange calm and acceptance. Many experienced survivors' guilt when the grenade wounded others but spared them. The sound of the spoon release became one of the most feared sounds of the war. Veterans report decades of adverse reactions to similar metallic sounds, keys dropping, metal clips releasing, even the pop of a soda can tab. Grenade traps were responsible for an estimated 15 to 20% of all booby trap casualties in Vietnam. Because of their larger kill radius and fragmentation pattern, they frequently caused multiple casualties in a single incident. Unit cohesion often suffered significantly after grenade trap encounters, as soldiers witnessed friends being wounded or killed by invisible enemies. What made these traps so devastating wasn't just the physical damage, it was the way they rewired the human brain. Psychologists now understand that the constant threat of hidden danger activates the amygdala, the brain's fear center, keeping it in a perpetual state of high alert. Over time, this causes changes in brain chemistry and structure. The hippocampus, responsible for memory and emotional regulation, can actually shrink. The prefrontal cortex, which manages decision-making and rational thought, becomes less active. What this means in practical terms: soldiers developed PTSD at rates far exceeding previous wars. A 1988 study found that Vietnam veterans had PTSD rates of 30.9% for men and 26.9% for women, significantly higher than veterans of other conflicts. The hypervigilance doesn't go away. Veterans describe being unable to walk without scanning the ground, unable to enter buildings without checking doorways, unable to relax in outdoor spaces. Some refuse to go camping or hiking. Others can't walk through parks without extreme anxiety. The startle response becomes exaggerated. Sudden sounds, unexpected movements, these trigger immediate fight or flight reactions that can last for minutes or hours. Family members report that veterans sometimes react violently to being surprised, unable to control the instinctive defensive response. Sleep disturbances are nearly universal. The brain doesn't distinguish between real and imagined threats during sleep, so nightmares featuring traps, ambushes, and hidden dangers plague veterans for decades. Many develop chronic insomnia rather than face the nightmares. The traps of Vietnam were weapons of terror disguised as weapons of war. They didn't just kill and maim, they destroyed trust, shattered peace of mind, and created wounds that never fully healed. These soldiers faced an enemy they rarely saw, in a war with no clear front lines, where the ground itself was hostile and every step could be fatal. They lived in a state of constant fear, constant vigilance, constant awareness of their own mortality. And when they came home, they brought that fear with them, because the human brain doesn't have an off switch for survival mechanisms. Once you've learned that the world is full of hidden dangers, that lesson doesn't unlearn itself. These men deserve our understanding, our respect, and our recognition of what they endured, not just during the war, but every day since. If you're a Vietnam veteran watching this, or if you know someone who served it, thank you. Your sacrifice went beyond the battlefield. The psychological cost of that war continues to this day, and it's a debt that can never be fully repaid. If you have experiences you'd like to share, or stories that need to be heard, please leave them in the comments. This history deserves to be preserved, and these voices deserve to be amplified. If this video helped you understand something about the Vietnam War that you didn't know before, please consider liking and subscribing. All the information in this video comes from veteran testimonies, military records, and historical research. Sources are available in the description. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all who served.